But we have more information on the Dark Horse comics along with some pictures I'd like to analyze. So I'm going to break this video into two parts. First, I'm going to give you the information on what the team behind the comic has to say about the comic, what elements are going to introduce and things like that. And the second half, I'm going to analyze some screenshots that they gave. Two was from the actual comic itself, but the other two were covers of the comic. And I just want to give my thoughts on it. So let's get right into it. Now, if you want to read the entire article for yourself, there will be a link in the description. However, I want to talk about some important parts that really get me excited. First off, this whole entire thing was him talking about his challenges adapting Kratos into a comic. He goes on to say, I had his personality and his motivations locked down fairly early on, but I kept stumbling from time to time on phrasing things just right. Sometimes it was just a matter of putting too many words in Kratos' mouth, but a conference call with Corey and the team at Santa Monica Studio finally helped me get a handle on it, and it was smooth sailing from there. Now, I love this because we already know that Santa Monica Studios is working with this company in order to get the comic book out, in order to get the lore right, to get everything right. So it's really a pleasure to hear that Santa Monica is working with this comic book so closely, describes things in the least amount of words possible. He doesn't even say Atreus' name half the time, just calls him boy, calls Mimir head, Brock and Sindri dwarf, he says the stranger. You know, Kratos doesn't speak a lot, and that's with his character throughout the entire story. So the people making the comics, they're probably putting too many words, and they realize this, and they just called and asked for help, and I absolutely love that. And that's pretty much all this article talks about, is him and his challenges with God of War, him talking about the art style, him having to ask for help from Santa Monica Studio directly, has to collab with other people, and I feel that's amazing because the more people you have on this project, the better. You know, the better the fans are going to appreciate it, the better the content within the comic is going to be. So I just love this. I love the way it sounds. Again, the length is making me a little bit iffy, to be honest with you. I am gonna purchase this, so I do want to spend a long time reading it, but I know it's not a whole book. The whole collection is gonna be out around January, I believe, so we'll just have to wait and see. But let's move on to analyzing the pictures that they shared. Moving on to the next part of this article, again, links in the description, but basically this long article is talking about, once again, the importance of a prequel, how to get it right, how Santa Monica Studios input into Dark Horse Comics, and everything like that. But something that I also want to talk about very quickly is that for this comic is the fact that they are dealing with a cult. That's going to be very important on when I'm analyzing some of the pictures. But first, let's get into the comic strips itself. The comic strips itself is Atreus and Kratos. Atreus is telling Kratos that Faye had left and she'd be back by nightfall. He said that she is now out hunting and that she'd be back by nightfall, and Kratos just looks down at Atreus with like this evil glare and said, she told you nothing else? And then Atreus says, she said I should chop down some trees for some wood. And then Kratos says it's about time you start pulling your own weight. And he's just pretty damn harsh in this. Even at the end of the second comic strip, Atreus asks Kratos, are you going out to test yourself? And Kratos says, yes I am, do not disappoint me. I don't know, man. And the last scene wherein Atreus is just standing there by himself as Kratos leaves the scene, I don't know, it leaves me pretty sad. You have to remember, guys, that this is a prequel. That closeness is not there. This is before the events of the game, and we all saw that Kratos can be pretty harsh, very distant. We really see that here, and Atreus is just left by himself, looking down, and I don't know, me seeing that, it's just, I don't know, it gives me this irking feeling. Like, I actually care about Atreus as a character. I've always cared about Atreus, but now I realize how much, since Kratos just like leaves the kid there. One of the descriptions for this comic is the fact that they are dealing with a cult. I believe I mentioned that in my last video as well. And looking at the 3 screenshots they gave us, we see more of this cult. So first off, we have the bear screenshot. We had already seen that. But a second screenshot that shows Atreus and Kratos in the middle of this group of people who I am assuming are the enemies, are the cult. One of the things I like to mention is that bears are with the people. Now, a lot of cults out there identify as an animal, like an animal is a mascot. You know, you have the goats in some cults, and this cult seems to be worshiping bears, has a bear thing going on. And if you remember one of the screenshots, one of the very first screenshots we got for the Dark Horse comic is a bear attacking Kratos. So maybe this cult, they work with bears, or they use spells so that bears will do as they say. And these obviously aren't normal bears. I mean, look at this thing. This thing is freaking huge as it attacks Kratos. So I'm guessing that scene that we saw in the comic strip when Atreus says, are you going back out there to test yourself? Kratos eventually somehow gets involved with this cult after that scene is done. Atreus then follows Kratos because we see Atreus and Kratos together about to fight. Atreus holding his bow, even though he's not a good shooter yet, because Kratos assisted Atreus in how to shoot his bow in the game. So he's not the best shooter. He's not really a warrior yet like he is in the game. But I don't know, I really like this scene of these two standing together even though they don't get along, even though we do know their awkward relationship with one another. One of the scenes I haven't talked about yet was the woman in the by the fire, and you see skulls. Perhaps this is some type of ritual. We know that this comic is going to resolve around Kratos and how he deals with his rage and how he finally overcomes that rage inside of himself. So I'm hoping that this scene here is pretty much helping Kratos with that on his journey to finally quell that anger he has buried inside of him that he so desperately is trying to get rid of. We saw this test in the very first Dark Horse comic number 0 that's available on PSN if you want to check that out. So that's what I think. Those are my thoughts on the comic strips and the screenshots. The very first comic will be available November 14th. I believe, with the full set being released in January. So I think that is pretty goddamn cool. But let me know you guys' thoughts on the Dark Horse comics. I, for one, am very excited. I love the fact that they're working with Santa Monica on this, that they're getting the lore right, that they're putting so many different artists on this project as well to make sure the art is on point. So yeah, I'm gonna be out of here. Thank you guys for listening. Deuces.